Today on Big Break Pod, we have Emmy-Award winning producer Kris Eber. We're going to be talking to him for an episode called Ask a Producer on the topic of safety on set. This is a really good one. Stick with us. Hey everybody, welcome. Thomas M. Copeland here, your host and creator of Big Break Pod. And today we're going to have an entire episode dedicated to my brother, yes, brother by blood, believe it or not, Emmy Award winning producer Kris Eber. We're going to be talking with him today about safety on set, safety in general. And this topic really came up because it's an interesting topic to me. I work and live in South Florida, not for much longer, but for now. Work and live in South Florida as I have my entire life. My brother and I grew up in Jupiter, Florida, and my brother talks a lot about in prior episodes, my brother's talked a lot about us growing up in Jupiter, and he moved off and went to LA pretty early in life while I sort of stuck back and sort of did other things with my life until I kind of came back around and got back into, acting and producing and directing and anyway, that's a whole other story, my whole history there. I won't go into it. But the point is that here in South Florida, we are a state in which it's a right-to-work state, right? And so what that means is that we have union work that happens here, but more often than not, it's actually non-union work that occurs here in Florida. A lot of commercial, but mostly non-union work. And then every now and then we get big union productions for film and TV when they come in. But the vast majority of the work is non-union. And so, with that, there's lots of sort of subjective opinions about whether that's good or bad. I don't really have an opinion on whether it's good or bad. I just sort of have an observation and an interesting one that, when it comes to non-union productions, the idea, at least from the unions folks, would be that, maybe corners can be cut, budgets can be cut, and sometimes safety can be cut. Now, I say that only as a general sort of, again, observation about a non-union state. I don't really have, I've had experiences where I've been on non-union and union productions that are both run really well, and I've been on productions that weren't run very well, and almost the sort of non-union or union status didn't really make a difference on that. It was more about the people behind the projects, right? So what I really want to do is get my brother on to talk to him about sort of how he thinks about, from an executive producer and line producer level, certainly working with big studios in Los Angeles, how he thinks about safety and sort of what his approach to safety is. And he had a long-ranging and broad sort of opinion on this, which I thought was really, really interesting. He talks sort of at length about how he thinks about designing sort of projects and designing sets and building teams with first and foremost safety in mind, that I thought was really fascinating. So this kind of came out of, sort of the news from Hollywood and sort of the trial surrounding Alec Baldwin in July and sort of August of 2024. And how that sort of trial ended with being thrown out essentially by the judge over what was perceived to be, or over what the judge perceived to be, evidentiary mishandling by the prosecutor. So the whole case was thrown out. But it really kind of opened up this interesting question, to me at least, of like, when something goes wrong on set, who's to blame, right? I mean, is it the actor? Is it the producers? Is it the line producers? Is it the key grip? Like, who is it, right? And so that was really the question I posed to Kris, and he really kind of went from there and jumped off. We got into a conversation about safety as a whole and sort of as an approach to the work that he does. And I hope maybe it'll kind of glean some insight into, for yourself, if you're out there and you're either a producer or a filmmaker, union or non-union, Florida or non-Florida. Maybe you'll glean some insights into sort of how you can approach safety. We also talk a lot about my experiences with safety on set, both on stage and on set for film, TV, and theater, and sort of the thoughts that go into that, especially on theater. Theater is so physical, and I've been in really very physical productions, including I talk about my one of my lead roles in Death Trap, which is an incredibly physical production. If you've ever seen it, there's all sorts of fake murders that happen, and then kind of a real, quote unquote, air quotes here, real murder that kind of then happens at the end of the play. It's it's a really interesting play, but the point is that it's a very physical play, much more so than others that I've been involved in. So we talk about like my perspective and how we approached safety there, and that was at a community theater, right? And that production was approached by the artistic director and the director, the set designer, with really safety in mind. I thought I was really impressed with how that was handled. So anyway, we get into all these conversations. This episode and this Ask a Producer episode with my brother is really all about safety and how we approach it. So I hope you find some interest in this. Let's stick around for another 60 seconds or so and get into the conversation with Emmy Award-winning producer Kris Eber, my brother. See you in a minute.
If you're an actor serious about your craft, then you know you're serious about improving your read, your presentation, and your on-camera delivery. And there's no faster way to sharpen your skills than with detailed collaborative feedback from your fellow actors, directors, casting directors, coaches, and other creative professionals in the industry. So, how do you get in front of the people you need to impress? With Show Coach. Available for Apple and Android, this exciting app gives you a stage to showcase your work, including self-tapes, reels, and monologues, specifically to solicit feedback from the professionals who can hire you. And for a limited time, Show Coach is absolutely free to use. Industry professionals can apply to become a coach and earn money for critiquing student posts. Download the app as a student or coach from your mobile app store or visit showcoach.app. That's showcoach.app to learn more. Show Coach. Artists encouraging greatness.
All right, back with us again today, my brother, my man, Kris Eber. Kris is actually, I should say right off the front before you even join us here. In the first episode, I totally neglected to introduce you, and it'd probably be a good idea if we talk a little about who you are, what you do, where you come from. Although we did talk about where you came from, didn't we? We spent the whole time talking about that. Yeah. But let's talk a little bit about, as by way of an actual formal introduction of you here. Kris is an Emmy Award-winning producer, having won an award in the Family Emmys for producer on Muppets Mayhem for Disney+. He's been producing for the Muppets for over 17 years, was recently the executive producer on Dave and the Kids Are All Right, and currently you're working on a series for HBO, as I understand that's under NDA, so we'll stay away from talking about that. Anything else that you're working on recently that I missed, or anything important to note?
No, I mean, I'm a freelance producer primarily in single cam half-hour comedy, so that usually means shooting a couple of shows a year. So the last few years, you touched on Dave and the Muppets Mayhem. I also produced Loot for Apple Plus, or Apple TV, excuse me. I mean, I'm glad to say that it's been, even as a freelancer, I've stayed busy over the years, and I love what I do.
Fantastic.
Seems so cheesy.
Yeah. And I wonder how often we're going to confuse the Apple Pluses versus the Disney extras versus the Hulu Next versus the DirecTV Now versus everything else that's out there. Anywho. So cool. So today, actually, Kris, I want to talk a little bit about something that was relevant and recent, both in the industry, but also in my own personal experience. And that's really safety on set. This isn't something that I hear talked about too often. That's kind of why I wanted to bring it up as a topic today, because I do listen to a lot of podcasts, read a lot of books, working in the industry, and I just don't see it all that often. I think the thing that maybe come to mind for most of our listeners that had garnered a whole lot of media and legal attention would be, of course, the terrible and unfortunate incident involving the cinematographer for Rust, the Alex Baldwin film, where she was unfortunately shot with a live round and killed. Alex Baldwin was put on a trial for that, and that trial was acquitted. So the judge acquitted that based on some mishandling of some evidence by the prosecutors. Doubt that trial is going to come back. And it's really not even the point of this discussion anyway, just to point out that it was a a terrible thing that happened, and it kind of shocked the industry, I think. But also,
yeah, I mean, maybe,
please.
I mean, a completely avoidable accident. Not to jump in here, but I think it's really interesting, that point of view where you're coming from, because I'm often looking at your experience through the lens of an actor.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, safety is top of mind. It's something we talk about every day. It's something we talk about multiple times a day. So it's interesting, that idea that from your perspective, maybe it isn't coming up, and we can talk about real specifics, like what happened in that moment when they're doing, a camera rehearsal with a weapon, that it's not a dummy weapon. In fact, there's a live round present, et cetera, right? We can look at that through the eyes of why did that happen in that moment at that time. But I think what we have to talk about is that safety, we're talking about safety weeks and months out, long before maybe a role is even cast or an actor is even on set. So from my perspective, safety is front of mind. I have every studio that I work with assigns at least one, and oftentimes more, safety advisors to the show. So they're coming to the table with the institutional knowledge of how the studio works and how they like to operate, and they help us as freelancers, as contract employees who are going from show to show, understand those standards and adhere to them. But then there are folks on the set, myself included, but certainly the first assistant director, the key grip. These are folks who are responsible for the safety of the equipment on stage, the safety of, and how that interacts with people. There's been tragic stories of equipment falling over and injuring and hurting crew and cast. We all know those stories of, big heavy equipment, scissor lifts, petty bones, fly swatters flying over, falling over, crashing to the ground, crashing into houses, into cars. So we work around a lot of very heavy equipment. And the movement, I will say, in the last certainly 5 years, though it's been going on for some time, has been a real movement towards safer sets, be there controlled work hours. There's, we have an anonymous safety hotline that's printed on every one of our call sheets that gives a platform for any crew member to raise a safety concern. And that's just one way to raise a concern. We have a safety meeting every morning where we talk to the crew and we talk about the things that we're doing that day and where there are some potential concerns. And we open that up right then and there and say, I'm the first AD, I'm the producer, I'm the UPM, whoever that is. If you see something, say something, come to us, we'll address it immediately. And that certainly extends to any actor on my set. So, what I can speak to is a real and sincere movement towards a safer working environment. And that has been going on for quite some time. When tragedies like this happen, and recently we had an absolute horrible thing occur where a grip who was, it's amazing. I mean, it's such it's one of those weird moments in life, but he was a week away from retirement. Wow. He had already had all of his paperwork. It was all done. In fact, he was starting this great program where he was going to go into the unions and use his retirement to work with people, to talk to people about how to plan for retirement and financial thoughts that he had and how he could do that. He was building this program, this PowerPoint program that he was looking forward to helping share with people who are soon to retire or recent retirees, something that was a personal passion of his. And after working a number of long days and ultimately an overnight, sadly, the industry kind of makes a little too cute by calling it a fratter day, when you start on Friday and you wrap on Saturday. And he died driving home. And it's heartbreaking. These things happen in the industry. And when they do, the whole of the industry, unites and uses these as opportunities to talk more about how we can make things more safe and how we can prevent accidents like that from occurring. And as a result, every studio in town right now, every major studio in town has some rules around the number of work hours that you can do on a given day. They're capped, and I think we can do more there. Some are capped at 14 hours, some are capped at 14 hours plus lunch. These are long days when you're doing that 5 days in a row, 10, 12, 22 weeks in a row. But it's happening, and the conversations are happening, and the crew, I'm so thankful. One of the awesome things that's happening in our industry is that we're seeing real, what's the word I'm looking for? Self-advocacy, or advocacy in general, and I think, I don't know if that's coming, I'm at a point in my career where I'm working with a lot of people who are similarly aged and have a similar experience. So maybe it's because we've had some miles on our tires and we've seen how things have been done wrong, that we will advocate and speak up when we think we can do something better or different or safe, and that's happening in a really sincere way. And I'm so thankful for it.
Yeah.
Because one person can't be everywhere. So we
That's
need
right.
everyone to kind of be looking through the lens of how can we be doing this safer. There's absolutely no reason why someone should be injured at work. And the examples that you've used, and I want to hear more about those, really comes down to communication, and communicating with your scene partner, communicating with the assistant director and the director of where your comfort level is, and feeling confident that that's not going to make you, that's the sad thing about all of this, is that if I speak up, am I going to be viewed differently? Am I some sort of rude, or am I, being unreasonable? But honestly, when it comes to safety, I hope you're in an environment where you bringing that up will be seen as an asset and not a hindrance.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Well, my heart goes out to, I think you said your friend, somebody that you had worked with. My heart goes out to his family. I'm sorry to hear about that. I'm sorry for your loss. It does sound, I will say it does sound similar to things that have happened in the past. I was preparing for this talk. I happened to just sort of Wikipedia a list of, tragedies that have occurred on film sets throughout the years. And this list goes, there's hundreds of incidences, which maybe isn't a lot when you consider the whole of the industry and its history. But anyway, there's hundreds of incidents that go back all the way into the 1920s. And the one through line of them, the one thing that seems to be similar across all of them, is these long hours, long days, short budgets, and demanding timelines and schedules. And maybe, I don't know if this is right or not, but maybe the production company behind it, or the backers, the funders behind it, the studios, kind of really pushing for that, or even turning a blind eye to it when that happens. Now, again, that's, I'm sure, as you mentioned, that's changing, but that's kind of what I see when I look at that list. It's a lot of car accidents after set. It's a lot of scouting locations, taking many hours of scouting locations, in planes and in helicopters. There are I picked out a few that were sort of like accidental, but so many of them seem like they're the result, at least partly, indirectly or directly, of the way in which movies and series are made, which is those long hours and days that bleed into each other. And so that really just comes down to a question of corners being cut, right? Like, at the end of the day, that's like, the schedule's fast, the corners being cut. In fact, the prosecutor on Alec Baldwin's case was making that very point as their primary premise behind the case, which is that these timelines were tight, money was short, and, corners were cut. That's how this happens. And so I think it's the corners are cut thing that I like to talk a little bit about and get some of your feedback on. So you talked about how you're focused on sort of doing what you can, what's within your power, safety meetings, planning beforehand, communication. But what happens when a studio does, and maybe this has happened to you, maybe it hasn't, but what happens when a studio does push for those long days and does push for some corners to be cut? How do you, in your role, push back on that? How do you counteract that if that does happen?
Yeah, I mean, I want to be clear. I've not been in that situation, right? And I don't know how prevalent that situation is in by today's standards. I certainly believe that those times could have occurred before, where, I mean, I think there was a time when you come into this business, and certainly for me, and that's this kind of ignorance of youth, or this belief of like, I mean, I used to work in prep, and when prep got long, I would literally go fall asleep on the couch in the edit bay, and I'd stay at the office all night, and I took pride in that. I took pride in how hard I was working and how dedicated I was. And but as you get older and you get more experience, you learn to work smarter. You learn, to find efficiencies, and certainly for myself, I started to really not admire that kind of work, and instead try and encourage in the people that I work with, and that there is another way to do that. So I guess to answer your question, and I'll use a really relative example from at least last week, but we and again, this has changed. This is in the last 3 years, maybe 5 years. We really go out of our way to communicate to cast and crew if someone is tired or doesn't feel safe driving home. We have alternative options for them. We cover Ubers to and from set. We'll get you a hotel room, and that's not something that you have to get pre-approved. That's not something. It's if you stop on the side of the road and you need to get a hotel room, I'm going to pay for it tomorrow. And we communicate that stuff top to bottom. Whenever we're shooting, a day that's going to exceed 12 hours, my production team sends out a memo to the whole crew reminding them of these policies that they can and should take advantage of. So, when we're talking about corners being cut, yeah, maybe that's happening in conversations about, do we need this thing or that thing, this prop, or I'm going to be clear, I'm talking about creative choices. We're never talking about, well, how can we work longer hours in a more unsafe environment or anything like that. In fact, just the opposite. So those costs are supported from the top down, at the studio level, and certainly down to the show. We are having these conversations with directors and writers about, we have a finite amount of hours that we can shoot in a given day and in a given week. So what do we need to do creatively to ensure that our ambitions fit within the timelines that we have? So these things are being talked about regularly. When you go outside of, a studio production, and as I understand it, Rust was not. This is a self-finance,
yes,
or alternative financed production, and there are thousands of them. I'm sure that they're constantly struggling with this idea of more with less.
Yeah,
but I don't know how that translates to the safety of the cast and the crew, and certainly through what seems to be some real inexperience. I mean, more has come out since the tragedy, but that they found additional live rounds on set, that they found live rounds in another actor's bandolier prop, any one of which could have made their way into a gun. We're learning that they're, at lunchtime, they're doing target practice, shooting with live rounds at cans set up on set. This is crazy. I mean, that's absolutely crazy, right? So while it's a great opportunity for the whole of the industry to look once again at how we can make this work safer, it's it's also, we can't completely ignore the fact that there were some really, really significant errors made that led to that tragedy. And I think there is criminal responsibility. There's certainly civil responsibility. I don't believe that falls onto the shoulders of an actor, a cast member. I don't believe that, I think this is a different conversation, because we're talking about Alec, the producer, versus Alec, the actor,
right?
But
which maybe makes it tricky. Maybe muddies
the failure happened long before that gun was handed to that actor, whoever that actor is.
Yeah. So you're drawing kind of a clear distinction between sort of studio financed, right, which is the world you live in, and kind of independent, self-financed, alternative financed, and that's where maybe we see some corners cut, as we've heard in this trial. Just moving on more generally. So is it the producer's role to primarily be responsible for security on set, and does that responsibility transfer to, say, like the line producer when the line producer's on set? How do you think about the unit production manager roles and responsibilities versus line producer, is there not much of a distinguish there when it comes to safety? I'm curious, sort of, where does safety land, generally speaking, on set in the day of shooting?
Yeah.
Whose shoulders does that kind of land on in your world?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can look to things like union contracts to have a better understanding of job responsibilities and duties. And while on set, the safety of the equipment is largely the domain of the key grip, who is helping support other departments and ensuring that they're doing things in a safe and responsible manner. And when they need support, they're there to help that. My brother-in-law is an incredibly established key grip in the industry, and he takes safety like so many. Like, that's not only unique to him at all, but we see a real pride in keeping a safe set and communicating the needs that we have to meet. So when it comes to equipment and to some extent the manpower and the safety of the set, the key grip is a responsible party. The assistant director is another responsible party when it comes to experience of the crew. So both of those folks are working in tandem to ensure that we're operating a safe set. Then going a step further, the UPM and the line producer, they are working in conjunction with those two folks, now a little bit offset, a little bit in the future. How are we planning to do this thing that's coming down the pike? And when we start involving other departments, special effects, stunts, all of them are going to have a voice in the conversation when it comes to conducting something safely. And talking about, in the unlikely event something go wrong, where does that go wrong? How could it go wrong? And how can we prevent it from occurring? So I'll take it, for instance, this week we were shooting 2 days in Tucson, Arizona in 100+ degree heat.
Yeah,
we took a very small
Sure.
crew with us. It was not large by standards. On a normal shoot day, I have about 150 folks working on any given day, and on these 2 days we had 14 people working. So a very small crew for what we needed. It was appropriate for what we were doing, but it was very small. And one of those 14 people, even though we're based in Los Angeles, is a medic. We brought a medic with us from LA who was an absolute necessity. They were keeping us hydrated, keeping us with electrolytes, and their presence, they're reminding us, at one point I'm walking from point A to point B and the medic tags me and says, "Here's a water." And I'm like, "I'm actually on my way to go get one right now." And he's like, "Cool, you can drink this water on your way to go get a water."
That's right.
And he handed it to me, and he was right. And I did, right? So we sometimes get focused, and in that we can lose sight of safety.
And that's the basic safety, right?
Whatnot.
And that's basic. That's, that's basics. That's the basic safety. That's staying hydrated in 114 degree heat, right? It doesn't get any simpler or easier than just handing some water out and having a medic on set.
Yeah, but people don't do it, right? I mean, that's the thing you're saying. I mean, I agree, it's incredibly basic, but there are people on set who can't get away. Like, oftentimes the camera department has a difficulty in getting away from camera, right? Some positions are busy in the morning or busy in the afternoon or both. Some positions are busy in the middle of the day, right? Catering might be slow in the morning, slow in the afternoon, but man, at lunchtime, they're slammed.
They're on, right?
So there are some departments who can't get away, who can't hydrate, so we need to bring the water to them. And someone needs to be thinking about that and communicating that expectation and ensuring that that's happening, because it's very easy to cut those corners or assume, well, if somebody's thirsty, they're just going to go get some water. Well, you can't assume that, right. Not in environments that are as harsh as that.
Yeah, that's right.
And we had a really safe and productive shoot. And I give a lot of credit to the medics and in this case, the transportation department who kept us cool and kept, air conditioned van. I mean, it couldn't have been done without that, but that started 2 weeks before, when you start talking about who's going to be going on the shoot and, prioritizing when you say cutting corners. We didn't bring everybody that we could have or should have, but we absolutely never considered doing it without a medic. That's right. Yeah. Great. One thing that's I thought about too with this episode is sort of just like my experience in sort of safety on set from an actor's perspective.
I have a couple of interesting stories. One actually happened recently where, well, first and foremost, let me say something that I thought was really interesting that I've never seen before. So earlier this year, I was on a set where there was a gun used. And it was the first AD who got us all together in the morning and had a safety meeting and explained that this gun was rubberized. It didn't have a working trigger. And she asked anybody want to come up and touch it and see it, because after now,
Absolutely.
after today, it's going to go with it's going to go with props, and then it's going to go with that actor. And when that actor is not on camera, it's going back to props. So this is your one opportunity to come up and see it and touch it. And so the whole floor was silent, but I'm like, let me see it, because I went up because I wanted to see it, because I'm like, I'm just curious what a prop gun is. But I'll be damned. It looks like a gun, it looks like a handgun, but it's rubber. I thought that was really interesting. It was said in such a way where I think nobody on the floor kind of expected it to happen. Aside from obviously the people who did it, they knew what they were doing. But I think like we as actors kind of like looked at each other like, why do we need to see it? But the truth is, they're doing that proactive safety. So anyway, that was something that I thought was really interesting that I had never seen before. I had also never been on a set with a gun, I don't think. Maybe that was my first time. So maybe that's normal. But that sounds a lot like the proactive.
It's very commonplace. It's very commonplace that we'll invite anyone up, whether it's a dummy gun or we'll demonstrate it if it has live action in that, it has moving parts. Mm-hmm. But here too, things are changing, right? Years ago, that behavior was much more casual. Mm-hmm. Not anymore. I'm on an HBO project right now, and HBO has a firm policy that there are no working guns on set. It's zero.
And we don't notice, right? We don't, as viewers, we don't notice.
Yeah, no. There's no excuse. I mean, their policy is a great policy, but it's also, to me, just such a clear and obvious policy. Some great innovations have sadly come out of this tragedy, where prop makers are building guns that are more believable, that have action, that without the propulsion of a blank can still throw the firing mechanism on a gun or turn the forgive me, I'm no gun expert, but turn the I don't know what you call
the
it.
Revolver on the handgun, the revolver.
That advances to the next thing. That the gun design is that's done by the explosion and the propulsion of the gunpowder, and that's why we use blanks. There's no projectile, but we still need that action to help make the gun function, I guess you'd say.
Yeah.
Well, now we've got prop guns that do all of that functionality using its own internal power, be it battery, be it springs, whatever, CO2, et cetera. That's completely removing the risk of a misfire. And these guns can't be loaded. You can't put a bullet in them. So to me, I can say confidently, and I don't make those kinds of shows. I don't make those shows where we have a lot of weapons, but I have. Recently on Dave, the finale, we had a crossbow played very large in a shootout with Brad Pitt. We've got folks on set who are coming up and wanting to look at the crossbow and evaluate and understand how it works, because the crossbow has some obvious mechanisms that need to fire, and an arrow is sitting there and such. And so we're exhausted in that, right? Mm-hmm. That's another place where you can't cut a corner. I'm sure on that day, any number of people were anxious to get started and start shooting, and the director, no less. But if that meeting takes 5 minutes or it takes 15 minutes, it's going to take the time that it takes, so that everybody walks out of that meeting feeling rest assured that we're not putting anyone at risk.
Speaking of crossbows, so my other experience with physical violence is with the show Death Trap. Do you know Death Trap?
I think I do. I mean, I know
kind of a little bit.
Relationship with it. But.
Yeah, sure. So I don't remember the actors who did the live movie. I think it was Christopher Kane and Christopher Reeves. Sorry, not Christopher Kane. Who's the older actor? Michael Caine and Christopher Reeves did the live action. Anyway, so it's a playwright and his protege, and they just in the play. It's 90 minutes of them just fighting and trying to kill each other. It's pretty fun. It's a great show, written in the 70s by Ira Klein, I think, Ira Levin. And so anyway, so I did this show at Lake Worth Playhouse, And the end finale is a crossbow to the heart at the top of a flight of stairs that I take, and then I've got to topple down those stairs. And on the opening night, the crossbow shot about 4 feet and landed, and we just had to like play it off. But anyway, that was pretty funny. That was kind of a funny moment. But that crossbow was a live crossbow, and it did shoot a blunted arrow. And we had figured out just through like playing it from line of sight that it would be shooting my direction while I'm off stage, but it would have to come across from me because I'm on this platform and I've got to come down these stairs. So there was like multiple times when it would like fly past me a couple of times, and we just kind of did our best to just wing it and make it happen. I mean, that was an incredible show. I would tumble down the stairs. That alone creates its own sort of concerns that the artistic director of the theater had to talk through with the director, and then I had to kind of figure out as an actor, like, how do I do this without hurting myself? And by the 21st show or whatever it was, it still kind of sucked, but I kind of had it figured out by that point. But anyway, the point is that there was one of the biggest lessons I learned was how to interact with other actors in physical sort of physical activity, and specifically any sort of physical violence that happens in a scene. So one of the early scenes in the play is an incredibly violent scene where I am strangled with what do you call those like wires where it's got the handle on it? I forget what it's called. It's like this medieval weapon. You could just imagine like a wire with two handles on it, and he grabs me from behind. The one thing that I learned in that experience was that I, as the actor, control the action. So as the actor who's being assaulted, I control the action. Nobody told me that. In fact, the first run that we did was a little too much, and I had to stop it and be like, hold on, let me do some things to make this more comfortable. Yeah. And so I learned in that show, in rehearsals, I learned that as the actor being assaulted, I control everything. I tell him how to grab me and how to do it. All he's got to do is wrap his arms around me, and I'll grab that wire. It was actually a real wire. And don't pull, don't do anything. I'll create everything. And so like I get up and I move around the stage and I fall and I try to get back up again and I fall again and I finally collapse. And he just follows me. And that was an incredibly valuable lesson, because if you as the actor don't speak up and have those conversations and do those rehearsals, then something bad can happen if you're not in control of that. And I've seen that too, where like, on another show where an actor kind of got strangled a little too real. And it was because maybe that assaulted actor didn't have a conversation about, all you've got to do is put your hand right here. I'll do everything else. You don't even have to touch me, really. I mean, I'll do everything else. And so that's been my sort of experience. It has been, maybe it's just the fact that, Florida is, of course, right to work. We're non-union. We have smaller productions. We have smaller crews, maybe even sort of like, some of these productions that I've been in, like Death Trap was a community theater. Not to disparage that those are not professionals, because they are. They're all professionals, all wonderful people. But just to say, like, I felt like it was a little bit on me to like learn those things. It felt like the responsibility was on me to speak up and kind of control it. And maybe that's right, maybe that's wrong, but, if there's any actors out there that have ever been in a situation where you've been uncomfortable, I think the point is speak up, and stop, and let's talk about it. And, even now today, in any show I'm on stage or on camera, anytime I touch somebody, we talk through the touching. I always do it. And I'm almost too much. I'm almost like, do you mind? I was just in a scene where I'm like flirting with my secretary, right? And so like I told her, I'm gonna touch your leg. Is that okay? And she, oh yeah, that's fine. But the point is, you talk about it, you have the conversation. So I guess I'm just curious, as kind of some parting thoughts here, if you have any thoughts on sort of like, does the responsibility come on the actor regardless? Does the actor always bear some does everybody bear some responsibility? What are some of your thoughts on that?
That would be my answer. I mean, I don't think the responsibility of the safety of a moment should fall on any one person independently. I can't speak to the live theater of it all. I mean, as you've been talking, my mind is racing of like, geez, you're firing an actual projectile, and sometimes it goes 4 feet, and sometimes it goes past your head.
Yeah, right.
I mean, the lack of repeatability or predictability of that really concerns me. Then the idea that you're falling downstairs, I'm wondering, are you padded up? What are you wearing under your costume? What about your knees?
Mm-hmm.
How are you protecting? I mean, is there a in my mind, is the arrow sticking out of you and you're having to deal with, like,
Yep, it is.
These are all real concerns that I think need to be talked through. And in the absence of someone taking that responsibility, be it the director, the stunt coordinator, then certainly the actor is one of many people who can speak up and raise concern. I don't have to be any of those roles, and I'll raise my hand and say, wait a second, hold on, how are we doing this? And so will the studio, so in my environment, Universal Studios, NBC production, they have very strict rules. Most everything is a stunt. An actor can't run in a scene in a Universal television production. That is considered a stunt. So we have the benefit of being able to cut, of using a stunt double, of using selective camera angles to help hide those switches, and we can do it quite effectively. So when you are doing anything beyond a run, you're having a conversation at the studio level, oftentimes with heads of production who are incredibly invested in understanding, what is our actor doing, how are they doing it, because this is a risk assessment that could put the whole of the show in jeopardy. We've all heard these stories of actors doing their own stunts, and then the show is put on pause and people's livelihoods are challenged or jeopardized because we have to wait for an ankle to heal or a finger to heal, or we have to hide a cast that now the actor is wearing the rest of the production. I'm being a little flippant here because, all of those things are problems, for that could have been avoided, and discussed, but somehow, that happens. And so from a studio's perspective, they're saying, hey, what are you doing with my investment? How are you putting my investment in jeopardy? And let's talk about that. So that's happening many, 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 many times before we get to set. So, so I guess to answer your question, I do feel like it's anybody's responsibility. And in my sets, we talked about it a lot, but it could come from anywhere, It doesn't have to be someone who is, safety is a direct line of their job responsibilities. I expect those folks to speak up, certainly. But if someone sees something and, it could be, we're talking about, where is the mic pack placed? If someone's going to fall on their back, can we put it on their leg? If someone's going to hit their leg into a desk, can we put it on their arm? What can we do to avoid the potential of injury? We're talking about that all the time.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, thanks for chatting with us about safety on set. This has been really great, and I think a topic worth talking about. So thanks for sharing your insights.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right, brother. See you next time. Hey, Thomas here again. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. The show is better when I get to hear from you. Got a question to ask our producer? Or you got a show idea or a guest I should interview? Maybe you just want to tell me that you love or can't stand the show. Either way, I want to hear from you. You can reach me at bigbreakpod@gmail.com, and you can find my acting profile at castingtom.com or at castingtom. Big Break Pod is created and hosted by me, Thomas M. Copeland. The show is a proud member of the Pod Populi Network. Original music by me. Find the show online at bigbreakpod.com and at bigbreakpod.